Hello, and welcome back to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you're here to let the day's worries settle like volcanic ash, to find calm after life's eruptions, or to simply let your mind drift through geological time, you've found the perfect refuge. Tonight, we're venturing deep beneath our feet to explore one of Earth's most powerful and patient forces, supervolcanoes. These sleeping giants have shaped our planet for millions of years, and yes, they're still there, quietly building pressure in places like Yellowstone, waiting with the kind of patience only geology can teach. This is a story about survival, adaptation, and the remarkable resilience of life itself. Could humanity weather such a catastrophic event? The answer might surprise you with its quiet optimism. Before we begin our gentle descent into magma chambers and survival scenarios, if you enjoy these peaceful explorations of Earth's most dramatic moments, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me, especially to someone whispering about catastrophes in the most soothing way possible. And please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you settling in from somewhere near an active volcano, or perhaps safely tucked away in geologically stable terrain? As always, I hope this isn't too captivating. But if you find yourself wide awake pondering volcanic winter and human ingenuity, at least you'll drift off knowing how remarkably adaptable we truly are. So breathe deep, let your muscles relax like cooling lava, and let's explore how humanity might dance with disaster. If you've just rejoined us after a peaceful pause, welcome back to this quiet corner of geological wonder. Perhaps you've been drifting, letting your mind wander through deep time, or maybe you've simply been breathing with the rhythm of the Earth itself. Either way, you're exactly where you need to be. We've been exploring a question that whispers itself through the ages. Could humanity survive the awakening of a sleeping giant? We've touched on the immense scale of these forces, these patient titans that rest beneath our feet like slumbering dragons in fairy tales. We've imagined the Toba eruption 74,000 years ago, when our ancestors looked up at skies gone dark and somehow found the strength to carry on. Now that we're comfortable with the scale, now that we can hold in our minds the image of forces so vast they reshape continents, let's drift a little deeper. Let's explore what these giants actually are, how they form in the secret spaces beneath the ground, and what it looks like when they finally, after millennia of patience, decide to stretch and yawn. Think of this as a gentle anatomy lesson, if you will. Not the kind that requires memorizing Latin names or drawing diagrams, but the kind that helps you understand the beautiful, terrible machinery that operates in the deep places of our world. So, settle back, let your breathing slow, and let's descend together into the hidden architecture of the Earth. Imagine, if you will, a balloon. Not the cheerful kind from childhood parties, but something vast and patient, something that exists on a scale that makes our biggest buildings look like grains of sand. This balloon sits deep beneath the surface of the Earth, sometimes 10 miles down, sometimes 20, filled not with helium or air, but with molten rock so hot it glows like a captive star. This is a magma chamber, and it's slowly, almost imperceptibly, inflating beneath continents. The rock down there isn't solid the way we think of solid things. It's more like thick honey, or taffy being pulled and stretched on a cosmic scale. The temperature hovers around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt copper, hot enough to turn diamonds into vapor. And yet, this molten rock has patience that puts mountains to shame. It sits, and waits, and grows, sometimes for hundreds of thousands of years. Here's what's beautiful about supervolcanoes. They don't build the towering peaks we usually associate with volcanic might. Mount Fuji, Mount Vesuvius, Mount St. Helens, these are the extroverts of the volcanic world, announcing their presence with elegant cones that pierce the sky. Supervolcanoes are the quiet ones, the introverts. They build inward instead of upward. When a supervolcano erupts, it doesn't add to the landscape, it subtracts from it. The magma chamber empties in one catastrophic exhale, and the ground above, no longer supported by that underground balloon, simply collapses. What's left behind is called a caldera, a vast, circular depression that can span dozens of miles. Yellowstone's caldera is about 34 miles wide and 45 miles long. If you've ever driven through Yellowstone National Park, you've been driving through the collapsed remains of an ancient eruption. And this brings us to a rather comforting thought. Yellowstone today is like a giant sleeping peacefully. The magma chamber beneath it is there, certainly still filled with that patient, glowing rock. But it's breathing slowly, gently, like a cat napping in a sunbeam. Those famous hot springs and geysers, they're the giant's breath, warm and steady, rising through cracks in the Earth's crust like gentle sighs. Scientists monitor this sleeping giant with the devotion of loving caregivers. They have seismometers scattered across the region like tiny stethoscopes, listening to the Earth's heartbeat. They measure ground deformation with GPS instruments so precise they can detect if the ground rises or falls by less than an inch. They analyze the chemistry of the hot springs, looking for subtle changes that might hint at stirrings in the deep. And here's what's remarkable. If Yellowstone were showing signs of waking up, we would know. Not next week, not next month. We would know years, possibly decades, in advance. The ground would swell like a slow geological inhale. Earthquake activity would increase. The chemistry of those hot springs would shift. It would be like watching someone gradually wake from a very, very long sleep. The current scientific consensus is beautifully reassuring in its simplicity. Yellowstone shows no signs of waking up anytime soon. The last eruption was about 640,000 years ago, which, in geological terms, was practically yesterday. But the magma chamber isn't pressurizing at dangerous rates. The ground isn't swelling significantly. The earthquakes that do occur are small and routine, like the gentle breathing of deep sleep. This doesn't mean Yellowstone will never erupt again, it almost certainly will, someday. But someday, in geological terms, could mean tens of thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands. The Earth operates on timescales that make human civilization look like a brief, bright firework against the night sky. But let's imagine, in the safe space of our sleepy exploration, what would happen if one of these giants did decide to wake up? What would it look like when the Earth finally exhales a breath it's been holding for millennia? The trigger might be surprisingly small, the final straw that breaks the geological camel's back. Perhaps a large earthquake disturbs the delicate balance of pressure in the magma chamber. Perhaps the chamber simply reaches a critical point of inflation, like a balloon stretched to its absolute limit. The exact mechanism isn't always clear, but the result is spectacular and terrible. First, the ground would begin to swell more rapidly, rising several feet over a period of months or years. This isn't subtle. It would be visible to the naked eye, like watching the Earth slowly take a deep breath. Springs and geysers might change their behavior. New hot springs might appear. Small earthquakes would become more frequent. Then, when the pressure finally exceeds the strength of the rock above, the eruption begins. Picture this. The ground doesn't just crack, it explodes upward with a force that dwarfs nuclear weapons. The initial blast sends a column of ash, rock, and superheated gas 50 miles into the atmosphere, higher than commercial jets fly, higher than the edge of space itself. This column, called a Plinian column after Pliny the Younger who witnessed Vesuvius, rises like a monstrous tree whose crown spreads across the entire sky. But here's where supervolcanoes show their true scale. That column is too massive to sustain itself. It collapses back to Earth in what scientists call pyroclastic flows, rivers of superheated rock, ash, and gas that move like liquid lightning across the landscape. These flows can reach temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and speeds of over 100 miles per hour. They pour down valleys and across plains like glowing avalanches, incinerating everything in their path. Meanwhile, the ash. Oh, the ash. Think of it as the Earth's own snow machine, but this snow falls hot and never melts. The finest particles ride the jet stream around the globe, creating sunsets of impossible beauty even as they dim the sun itself. Closer to the eruption, the ash fall can be measured in feet, not inches. It accumulates on roofs until buildings collapse. It clogs engines and lungs and rivers. Within hours, the immediate area, everything within 100 miles or so, is transformed into something that looks like the surface of an alien world. The landscape is buried under layers of ash and debris. The air is thick and choking. The sky, if you can see it through the falling ash, glows with an eerie twilight beauty. And all of this, the pyroclastic flows, the ash clouds, the burial of entire ecosystems, this is just the beginning. Because supervolcanoes don't just change the local landscape, they change the world. Let's pause here for a moment. Breathe deeply clean, clear air that doesn't burn your lungs or taste of sulfur. Feel the solid ground beneath you, stable and dependable. Look around at the familiar shapes of your world, the gentle interplay of light and shadow that makes everything feel safe and known. It's worth pausing because what we're exploring together is genuinely awe-inspiring in the truest sense of that often overused phrase. These forces operate on scales that stretch our imagination to its limits. They remind us that we live on a planet that is not just alive, but powerfully, creatively, terrifyingly alive. And yet, And here's what's remarkable about humans. We don't cower in fear before such immensity. We study it. We measure it. We build early warning systems and emergency plans. We look at forces that could reshape continents and ask, how do we adapt? How do we survive? How do we even thrive? This is perhaps our greatest gift as a species. The ability to stare into the vast unknown and respond not with paralyzing terror, but with curiosity, ingenuity, and stubborn hope. We are the animal that makes plans, that builds communities, that tells stories to comfort ourselves in the dark. But before we explore those stories of human resilience and adaptation, let's complete our anatomy lesson. Let's understand what survival would actually mean in practical terms. In the vocabulary of volcanology, there's a phrase that sounds almost gentle: the immediate impact zone. It refers to everything within roughly 100 miles of the eruption, the area that would be, to use another deceptively mild term, directly affected. Let's be honest about what directly affected means, while keeping our exploration calm and factual rather than frightening. Within this zone, survival would depend almost entirely on one factor: distance from ground zero. Geography, in the most literal sense, becomes destiny. Those closest to the eruption, say, within the first 20 or 30 miles, would face conditions that are simply incompatible with human life. The pyroclastic flows we discussed earlier don't give second chances. They move too fast to outrun and burn too hot to survive. But here's where the scale of these events becomes almost paradoxically reassuring. Most people don't live directly next to supervolcanic calderas. Yellowstone National Park, for instance, has about 4 million visitors per year, but only a few thousand people live in the surrounding area year-round. If an eruption occurred during peak tourist season, the numbers would be higher, but still relatively small in the context of global population. Moving further out 40, 60, 80 miles from the eruption, the immediate danger shifts from superheated flows to something more manageable but still serious. Ash fall. Picture snow, but heavier, and it doesn't melt. A few inches might be manageable with the right preparation. A few feet becomes genuinely dangerous, collapsing roofs and making travel impossible. The ash doesn't fall like snow, though. It falls like concrete dust, fine and choking. It gets into everything: engines, lungs, water supplies, electrical systems. It turns day into twilight and makes the air thick and difficult to breathe. But unlike the pyroclastic flows, ashfall is survivable with preparation and the right protective gear. Here's what's important to understand. Even in the immediate impact zone, survival isn't impossible. It's just a matter of preparation, timing, and, frankly, luck. Communities that have planned for volcanic eruptions, that have emergency supplies and evacuation routes, that have practiced the strange dance of disaster response, fare much better than those caught unprepared. And beyond that 100-mile radius, the world continues, changed, but not destroyed. Cities function, governments operate. The global network of communication, commerce, and cooperation remains largely intact. This is crucial to remember as we continue our gentle exploration. Supervolcanic eruptions are catastrophic, but they're not apocalyptic. They're events that humanity can survive, adapt to, and eventually recover from. The question isn't whether our species would survive, it's how we would adapt, how we would support each other through the difficult years that would follow, and how we would emerge from the experience changed but not defeated. But survival isn't just about avoiding the blast zone or weathering the ash fall. The real challenge and the real story begins when the dust starts to settle and the long-term effects begin to unfold. We've explored the anatomy of these sleeping giants, traced the architecture of their hidden chambers, and walked through the immediate aftermath of their awakening. But now, as we drift deeper into our quiet investigation, we need to expand our view. We need to step back from the blast zones and ash falls and look at something far more subtle, far more patient, and in many ways far more profound. Picture the Earth from space, that famous blue marble suspended in the cosmic dark, wrapped in swirls of white cloud and blessed with the golden light of our star. Now imagine someone slowly, gently, drawing a gauze curtain across that light, not blocking it entirely, but dimming it, filtering it, turning bright noon into something that feels perpetually like late afternoon. This is what happens when a supervolcano becomes a cosmic fog machine. The ash we discussed, those fine particles that ride the jet streams like microscopic hitchhikers, they don't simply fall back to Earth and disappear. The finest particles, smaller than dust motes, lighter than pollen, rise into the stratosphere and linger there, like an atmospheric memory of the eruption. They circle the globe, carried by winds that blow in rivers 30,000 feet above our heads, and slowly, gradually, they change the very nature of daylight itself. This is how volcanic winter begins. Not with the dramatic suddenness of the eruption itself, but with the quiet persistence of particles that refuse to settle. Summer doesn't disappear all at once, it simply forgets to arrive with its usual enthusiasm. The sun still rises and sets, but its light comes filtered through a veil of volcanic glass, and the warmth that should follow that light somehow gets lost along the way. We're talking about temperature drops that might seem modest on paper, perhaps 3 to 5 degrees Celsius globally, sometimes more in certain regions. But temperature, like love or music or the turning of seasons, is more than numbers. It's the difference between rain and snow, between growing seasons that flourish and growing seasons that fail, between ecosystems that thrive and ecosystems that hold their breath and wait. This is the true reach of supervolcanoes, not just their ability to reshape local landscapes, but their power to dim the sun itself, to change the very climate of our world for years at a time. And to understand what this means for human survival, we need to travel back in time to when it happened before. Let's drift back 74,000 years, to a time when our ancestors were just beginning to truly understand fire, when language was still young and writing was unimaginable. The world was already cooler then. We were in the middle of an ice age, with great sheets of ice covering much of northern Europe and North America. But life had found its rhythms, ecosystems had adapted to the chill, and small bands of early humans had spread across Africa and into Asia, carrying with them the precious gifts of tool-making, cooperation, and hope. Then, one day in what we now call Indonesia, Mount Toba woke up. Picture an island in what is now Lake Toba, a place of extraordinary beauty, where tropical forests meet volcanic soil, and the air hums with the life of countless species. But beneath this paradise, pressure had been building for millennia. The magma chamber was vast, even by supervolcanic standards, and when it finally released its patient breath, the eruption was magnificent and terrible beyond anything in recorded human history. The initial blast sent a column of ash and debris over 50 miles into the atmosphere, so high that it brushed against the edge of space itself. For anyone within 1,000 miles, day turned to night in a matter of hours. Pyroclastic flows raced across the Indonesian archipelago like rivers of liquid fire, and ash began to fall across an area the size of several modern countries. But this was just the opening act. Within days, the finest ash particles had reached the jet stream and begun their slow dance around the globe. Within weeks, sunsets in Africa glowed with unnatural colours. Within months, the global climate began to shift in ways that would persist for years. The numbers tell part of the story. Global temperatures dropped by perhaps 6 to 10 degrees Celsius, enough to turn temperate regions frigid and to push many ecosystems beyond their limits. But numbers alone can't capture what this meant for the living world. Imagine summer arriving weak and uncertain, like a guest who's lost their confidence. Growing seasons shortened by weeks or months. Plants that had evolved to expect certain patterns of warmth and cold suddenly found themselves in a world that no longer followed the rules. Forests began to thin. Grasslands retreated. The intricate food webs that had taken millennia to develop began to unravel like sweaters with pulled threads. For the animals that depended on those plants, and for the predators that depended on those animals, survival became a game of musical chairs played on a planetary scale. Species that had thrived found themselves struggling. Migration patterns shifted as herds followed the retreating warmth. Some species simply couldn't adapt quickly enough. And our ancestors? They were caught in this transformation just like every other species, but with one crucial difference. They had begun to develop the tools, both physical and social, that would define human survival for millennia to come. The archaeological evidence of this period reads like a mystery novel, written in ash layers and genetic code. In caves and ancient campsites, we find evidence of the Toba eruption preserved in distinct layers of volcanic glass. But we also find evidence of something remarkable. Our ancestors didn't just survive this period, they innovated. Tool technologies became more sophisticated during this time. Evidence suggests that social cooperation became more complex and far-reaching. Trade networks, the primitive ancestors of our global economy, began to develop as groups shared resources and knowledge across vast distances. But perhaps the most striking evidence comes from our own DNA. Genetic studies suggest that the human population went through what scientists call a bottleneck. During this period, a time when our numbers dropped dramatically, possibly to as few as 3 to 10,000 individuals worldwide. Think about that for a moment. The entire future of our species, all 7 billion of us alive today, all the art and music and literature and scientific discovery that would follow, hanging on the survival of a group smaller than the population of many small towns. Yet, here we are. The population bottleneck theory is still debated among scientists. Genetics is a complex science, and ancient populations are hard to count from the perspective of tens of thousands of years. But whether the numbers drop to thousands or tens of thousands, the broader story remains the same. Our species faced a test that pushed us to the very edge of extinction, and we not only survived but emerged with new capabilities. Some researchers think this pressure might have actually accelerated human development, that the necessity of cooperation, innovation, and adaptation in the face of global climate disruption helped forge the social and cognitive abilities that would eventually lead to agriculture, cities, and civilization itself. It's a beautiful paradox. The same forces that nearly destroyed our species might have helped create the qualities that make us most human. Our ability to cooperate across kinship lines, to share knowledge and resources, to plan for uncertain futures, and to find hope even in the darkest winters. The Toba winter lasted somewhere between 6 and 10 years, long enough for children to be born and grow up, knowing only a world where summer was a weak and distant thing, where the sun seemed perpetually filtered through gauze, where survival meant constant adaptation and community support. And then, gradually, the particles settled. The atmosphere cleared. The sun remembered how to shine with its full strength. The world began to warm again. Ecosystems began to recover, and our ancestors, changed by their experience, but not defeated by it, began the long work of rebuilding and multiplying and spreading across a world that was once again becoming hospitable to life. The Toba story teaches us something profound about life's capacity for persistence. But it wasn't just humans who survived that long volcanic winter. If we look carefully at the fossil record and genetic evidence from that period, we find a remarkable library of survival strategies, nature's own instruction manual for weathering global catastrophe. Take the great mammals of the time. Many species of large herbivores, the ancestors of elephants, rhinos, and various deer species, survived by becoming nomadic in ways they had never been before. Instead of following traditional seasonal migration routes, they followed the retreating edges of viable habitat, sometimes traveling thousands of miles to find areas where plants could still grow in the dimmed sunlight. The predators that hunted them developed their own adaptations. Some became more opportunistic, expanding their diets to include carrion and smaller prey they might have ignored in better times. Others became more efficient hunters, developing enhanced cooperation strategies that allowed smaller packs to take down larger prey. But perhaps the most instructive lessons come from the smaller creatures, the rodents, the birds, the countless species that seem humble until you realize they're the backbone of most ecosystems. These animals had something in common. They were already adapted to variability. Mice and rats and their relatives had evolved to handle fluctuating food supplies. Many bird species were already migratory, already practiced in the art of finding new homes when old ones became inhospitable. The plant world tells an equally fascinating story. Some trees survived by going dormant for longer periods, essentially extending their winter sleep until conditions improved. Others survived in what ecologists call refugia, pockets of warmth in a cooling world, usually in places protected by geography or local climate patterns. These refugia became like arks, preserving genetic diversity until the Ice Age winter finally ended and life could spread out again. Perhaps most remarkably, some plant communities seem to have survived by becoming more cooperative. Root systems became more interconnected, sharing nutrients across species lines in ways that might not have been necessary in better times. Mycorrhizal networks, the fungal threads that connect plant roots, became more extensive and more crucial for survival. The lesson that emerges from all of this is beautifully simple. Diversity saves lives. The ecosystems that survived the Toba winter were not the most specialized or the most perfectly adapted to specific conditions. They were the most flexible, the most cooperative, and the most diverse. Think of it as nature's way of spreading bets across the biological casino. No single survival strategy is guaranteed to work, but a community with many different strategies has a much better chance of finding at least some that do work. This principle applies not just to species, but to individuals within species. The humans who survived weren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest in any narrow sense. They were the ones who could adapt, who could cooperate, who could learn new skills and share resources and find hope even when the world seemed to be ending. They were the ones who understood, perhaps without articulating it in words, that survival is not an individual sport, it's a team effort that sometimes spans entire species. And this brings us to one of the most comforting aspects of the deep time record. Life doesn't just survive catastrophes, it learns from them. The ecosystems that emerged from the Toba winter were more resilient, more adaptable, more cooperative than the ones that went into it. Crisis, it seems, can be a teacher as much as a destroyer. The return of normal climate after a volcanic winter doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds like the world's slowest sunrise, gradually and then suddenly, as the last volcanic particles finally settle from the stratosphere and the sun regains its full strength. Ecosystems don't just snap back to their previous states like rubber bands. Instead, they undergo something more like a careful choreography of reawakening. The first to respond are usually the fastest-growing plants, grasses, herbs, the botanical equivalent of pioneer species. These plants carpet the landscapes that have been waiting in semi-dormancy, turning grey and brown expanses into meadows almost overnight once the growing conditions improve. Trees take longer. Some that went dormant during the worst years send out tentative new growth. Others, particularly the old-growth forests, may take decades to fully recover. But recover they do, often in patterns that are subtly different from before, as if the forest has learned something from its ordeal and is applying that knowledge to its regrowth. The animal populations follow the plants in a cascade of recovery that can be surprisingly rapid once it begins. Herbivores return to areas where vegetation has recovered. Predators follow the herbivores. Scavengers flourish as the ecosystem sorts itself out. Birds return to rebuilt nesting habitats. The intricate web of relationships that define a healthy ecosystem begins to reweave itself. For our human ancestors 74,000 years ago, recovery meant something both similar and different. Like other species, they followed the return of favorable climate and abundant resources. But unlike other species, they also carried with them the accumulated knowledge and innovations of the crisis years. The tools they had developed during the long winter didn't disappear. When the crisis ended, they became part of the permanent human toolkit. The social networks they had forged for survival became the foundation for more complex forms of cooperation. The trade routes established during the crisis became the pathways for cultural exchange and technological diffusion. Most remarkably, genetic evidence suggests that human populations didn't just recover, they exploded. The same DNA studies that show evidence of the population bottleneck also show evidence of rapid expansion in the millennia that followed. It's as if our species, having been tested by global catastrophe and found resilient, emerged with renewed vigor and began the great expansion that would eventually carry humans to every continent except Antarctica. This pattern crisis, followed by innovation, survival followed by expansion, would repeat itself throughout human history. The ice ages that followed Toba saw further developments in human technology and social organization. The end of the last ice age saw the development of agriculture. Smaller catastrophes throughout history have often been followed by periods of rapid cultural and technological development. It's almost as if our species has learned, at a deep evolutionary level, to treat crisis not just as something to survive, but as something to learn from and grow stronger through. When the sun remembered how to shine after the Toba winter, humanity was ready to make the most of every ray of returning light. As we drift back toward the present moment, it's worth pausing to consider what the Toba story means for us today. The world our ancestors inhabited 74,000 years ago was simpler in many ways. Smaller populations, no global infrastructure, no complex agricultural systems that feed billions. But it was also more vulnerable in other ways. No early warning systems, no stored food reserves, no global communication networks that could coordinate response and recovery efforts. The question that whispers through this ancient story is both simple and profound. What would a volcanic winter mean for our modern world, with all its strengths and all its new vulnerabilities? We have advantages our ancestors could never have imagined. We can monitor volcanic activity and predict eruptions years in advance. We have global food distribution systems and strategic reserves. We have technology that could potentially help us maintain crop production, even under dimmed skies. We have international cooperation frameworks and disaster response capabilities that span continents. But we also have new dependencies. Our ancestors lived in small, largely self-sufficient communities. We live in a globally interconnected system, where disruption in one region can cascade across the world. Our food system feeds 7 billion people efficiently, but it depends on predictable weather patterns and global transportation networks. The parallels to other global challenges are striking. Climate change, pandemic response, economic disruption, all of these require the same fundamental capabilities that allowed our ancestors to survive the Toba winter: adaptation, cooperation, innovation, and the willingness to support each other through difficult times. But we're not the same species we were 74,000 years ago. We're the descendants of the survivors, carrying in our genes and our cultures the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who faced impossible odds and somehow found a way forward. We've traveled through deep time together, witnessed the patient building of geological pressure, and walked alongside our ancestors as they navigated a world where the sun itself seemed dimmed by volcanic ash. We've seen how life persists, adapts, and eventually flourishes again even after the most dramatic disruptions our planet can produce. Now, as we drift back toward our own moment in history, it's time to take a gentle inventory of what we have that those ancient survivors did not. Think of this as a quiet accounting, not a boastful catalogue of human achievement, but a thoughtful assessment of the tools and capabilities that might serve us well should we ever face our own volcanic winter. We're no longer scattered bands relying on stone tools and the knowledge held in a few hundred minds. We are a species that has learned to store information outside our own memories, to coordinate across vast distances, to manipulate matter and energy in ways that would seem like magic to our ancestors. We have built systems that can feed billions, that can move resources across oceans overnight, that can warn us of approaching storms or shifting tectonic plates years before they affect our daily lives. But our modern world is also a more complex organism than anything that existed 74,000 years ago. Where our ancestors were largely self-sufficient in small groups, we depend on intricate networks of interdependence. A disruption in one part of our global system can cascade through the whole like ripples in a pond. The same technologies that give us unprecedented capabilities also create new vulnerabilities that our Stone Age ancestors never had to consider. A power grid that can illuminate entire continents can also fail catastrophically. A global food system that can eliminate famine in peacetime can become fragile when transportation networks are disrupted. Communication technologies that can connect every human on Earth in real time can also spread panic faster than any volcanic ash cloud. This is not a cause for alarm. It's simply a recognition that our strengths and vulnerabilities have evolved together, like dance partners learning new steps. The question isn't whether our modern systems are good or bad, strong or weak. The question is how they might serve us, and how we might need to adapt them if our technological civilization ever had to weather a genuine global crisis. So let's explore this modern arsenal with the same gentle curiosity we've brought to geological time and ancient survival stories. Let's see what tools we've built, what systems we've created, and what wisdom we've accumulated that might help us dance gracefully with disaster, should we ever need to. Perhaps nothing captures both the promise and the vulnerability of our modern world quite like the way we feed ourselves. Walk into any supermarket in any developed nation, and you'll find strawberries in December, rice from Thailand sitting next to wheat from Kansas, fish caught on one continent being sold on another within days of leaving the ocean. It's a miracle of coordination that would have been unimaginable to any generation before the last century. And yet, this same system that has largely eliminated famine from the developed world depends on a kind of climatic predictability that a supervolcanic eruption would shatter like a dropped glass. Modern agriculture is calibrated to the rhythms of normal seasons, the expected patterns of rainfall, temperature, and sunlight that allow us to plant in spring and harvest in fall, to grow tropical fruits in tropical regions, and temperate grains in temperate zones. Our farmers use varieties of crops that have been selected for maximum yield under these predictable conditions. Our distribution systems are designed around the assumption that food will be produced in certain places at certain times and can be moved efficiently to where it's needed. A volcanic winter would disrupt every link in this chain. When the harvest doesn't come when growing seasons shorten by weeks or months, when temperatures drop just enough to push crops beyond their viable ranges, when sunlight itself becomes scarce, the effects cascade through the global food system like falling dominoes. Regions that normally export food become importers. Countries that depend on food imports find themselves competing for shrinking supplies. Prices rise not just for exotic foods, but for the basic grains and vegetables that form the foundation of most diets. But here's what's remarkable about human ingenuity. We've begun to anticipate these vulnerabilities, and we've started building alternatives. Indoor agriculture, The quiet revolution happening in warehouses and repurposed buildings around the world represents one of our most promising adaptations. These facilities bring the sun inside in the form of LED lights, calibrated to the exact wavelengths plants need for photosynthesis. They control temperature, humidity, and nutrients with precision that would be impossible in open fields. A volcanic winter that dims the natural sun couldn't touch the artificial suns growing vegetables in vertical farms from Singapore to Detroit. The technology is still young, still expensive, still small in scale compared to traditional agriculture, but it's growing rapidly, and in a crisis, it could be scaled up much faster than anyone imagines. The same industrial capacity that now produces cars and electronics could be redirected to producing the LED lights and hydroponic systems needed to feed people when the outdoor growing season fails. We also have something our ancestors didn't: the ability to preserve food on an industrial scale, not just the traditional methods of drying, salting, and fermenting that humans have used for millennia, but modern preservation techniques that can keep food nutritious and safe for years. Freeze-drying, vacuum sealing, controlled atmosphere storage. These technologies could stretch existing food supplies through the lean years of a volcanic winter. Many nations already maintain strategic grain reserves, vast silos of wheat, rice, and corn, stored against the possibility of crop failures or supply disruptions. These reserves are typically designed to last for months, not years, but they could be expanded. The infrastructure already exists. What would be needed is the political will to stockpile food the way we already stockpile other strategic resources. Perhaps most importantly, we've developed global networks for sharing both food and knowledge about food production. When one region faces crop failures, others can increase production to compensate. When new growing techniques are developed, they can be shared instantly across the world. The same communication technologies that could spread panic could also coordinate the largest food relief operation in human history. But all of these technological solutions depend on something that can't be manufactured or stored: the psychology of sharing scarcity with grace. Food, more than almost anything else, triggers our deepest evolutionary instincts about survival. When food becomes scarce, the temptation is to hoard, to think only of immediate family or tribe, to treat every meal as potentially the last. These instincts served our ancestors well when they lived in small groups competing for limited resources. But in a globally connected world, facing a temporary but severe climate disruption, those same instincts could turn manageable shortages into genuine famines. The mathematics of survival in a volcanic winter are actually more encouraging than they might initially appear. The global food system currently produces enough calories to feed 9 billion people more than the current world population. Even with significant crop failures, there would likely be enough food to keep everyone alive if it were distributed efficiently and consumed carefully. The challenge wouldn't be absolute scarcity. It would be the social and political challenge of organizing a global rationing system that ensures everyone gets enough while no one gets excess. It would require communities to remember that survival is not an individual sport, that sharing increases everyone's chances of making it through to the other side. History offers both encouraging and sobering examples of how humans handle enforced scarcity. The rationing systems of World War II showed that entire nations could accept significant restrictions on their diets when they understood the necessity and believed the burden was being shared fairly. But history also shows how quickly social cohesion can break down when people believe some are hoarding while others go hungry. The food question, in the end, is not just about calories and distribution systems. It's about whether we can remember, in the midst of crisis, that we are all passengers on the same small planet, all equally deserving of the chance to see the sun shine brightly again. If food represents our most basic biological need, shelter represents our most fundamental act of creating human space in an inhospitable world. And in this domain, our modern capabilities offer both remarkable advantages and new challenges that our ancestors never had to consider. The homes we build today are marvels of environmental control. Central heating systems can maintain comfortable temperatures, even when the outdoor world turns hostile. Insulation materials that trap air in microscopic pockets can keep warmth inside and cold outside, with an efficiency that would amaze anyone from the pre-industrial world. Windows that let in light while blocking heat loss. Building materials that can bear enormous loads, including the weight of heavy ash falls that might accumulate on roofs during an eruption. But these systems, for all their sophistication, depend on infrastructure that could be vulnerable during a global crisis. Natural gas pipelines, electrical grids, supply chains that deliver heating oil, All of these could be disrupted by the economic and logistical challenges of a volcanic winter. The same centralized systems that make modern heating so efficient also create single points of failure that didn't exist when every family heated their home with wood they cut themselves. This is where the wisdom of gathering together becomes particularly relevant. Individual homes, for all their modern amenities, are ultimately isolated islands of warmth in a cold world. But community shelters, larger buildings, designed to house many families efficiently, can achieve economies of scale that make them much more resilient. Think of libraries, schools, community centers, churches, buildings that already exist in most communities and are designed to hold large numbers of people. With relatively modest modifications, these spaces could become community shelters capable of housing dozens or hundreds of people through the worst periods of a climate crisis. Large spaces are easier to heat efficiently. They allow for shared resources and mutual support. They create the social connections that are just as important for survival as physical warmth. Some communities have already begun thinking this way. Emergency management agencies design warming centers for winter storms. Faith communities organize shelter programs for the homeless. The organizational knowledge and infrastructure already exist. They would just need to be scaled up and sustained for longer periods. Energy alternatives become crucial when centralized power systems fail. Solar panels, while less effective under ash-dimmed skies, would still produce some electricity. Wind power could continue operating as long as the equipment could be protected from ash damage. Small-scale hydroelectric systems could provide power to communities near flowing water. But perhaps most importantly, we've developed battery technologies that can store energy when it's available and release it when it's needed. The real innovation might be in going backwards as well as forwards, rediscovering heating techniques that our ancestors used before fossil fuels became ubiquitous. Wood-burning stoves and fireplaces might see a renaissance, not as charming decorative features but as essential backup heating systems. Thermal mass heating building designs that absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night could reduce dependence on active heating systems. Clothing and insulation represent another domain where we've made remarkable advances. Modern synthetic materials can provide warmth that matches fur and down, while being lighter, more durable, and easier to manufacture. Layering systems that trap warm air while wicking away moisture. Materials that remain effective even when wet. Emergency blankets that reflect body heat back to the wearer. But perhaps most importantly, we've learned to think systemically about warmth. It's not just about heating individual buildings. It's about designing communities that minimize heat loss, that share energy resources efficiently, that create warm social spaces where people can gather and support each other. Wrapping ourselves in ingenuity, it turns out, means much more than just developing better materials. It means creating systems technological, social, and architectural that can keep human communities warm in both body and spirit, even when the world outside has turned temporarily cold. In any crisis, information becomes as vital as food or shelter. The ability to know what's happening, to coordinate responses, to maintain connections across distances. These capabilities can mean the difference between chaos and organized adaptation. And in this realm, our modern world possesses tools that are genuinely unprecedented in human history. The internet represents something like the nervous system of our global civilization, invisible threads binding us together in networks of communication that span continents in milliseconds. During a volcanic winter, these networks could serve multiple crucial functions: coordinating food distribution, sharing survival techniques, maintaining social connections that prevent isolation and despair, and providing early warning about changing conditions. But the internet, for all its power, is also fragile in ways that become obvious only when it breaks. It depends on electrical power, on physical infrastructure that could be damaged by ashfall, on complex systems that require constant maintenance. This is why redundancy becomes so important, having multiple ways to accomplish the same communication functions. Emergency broadcast systems represent one layer of this redundancy. These are the systems that can override regular programming to provide critical information during disasters. They use different technologies and different infrastructure than the internet, making them less likely to fail simultaneously. They're designed to reach people even when other communication methods have been disrupted. Ham radio operators, often dismissed as hobbyists in our hyper-connected age, represent another crucial backup system. These are the humble backup singers of crisis communication. People who maintain the knowledge and equipment to communicate using radio waves that can bounce around the world without depending on any centralized infrastructure. During Hurricane Katrina, When cell towers failed and internet connections were severed, ham radio operators provided some of the only reliable communication links between disaster areas and the outside world. But perhaps the most important aspect of crisis communication isn't technological, it's social. It's the question of how neighbors become family, how communities organize themselves to share information, resources, and emotional support. This is where modern technology and ancient social wisdom need to work together. Digital communication tools can help organize community response efforts, but they can't replace the face-to-face connections that build trust and mutual support. Social media can spread useful information quickly, but it can also spread panic and misinformation just as quickly. The delicate balance of truth becomes crucial during any extended crisis. People need accurate information to make good decisions, but they also need hope and social connection to maintain their psychological resilience. The communities that would thrive during a volcanic winter would be those that master this balance, using technology to stay informed and coordinated while maintaining the human connections that make survival feel worthwhile. Communication, in the end, is about more than just transmitting data. It's about maintaining the social fabric that holds communities together, about ensuring that even in the darkest winters, no one feels alone and everyone has access to both the information they need to survive and the emotional support they need to remain human. The health challenges of a volcanic winter would be both familiar and novel familiar, because humans have always had to deal with respiratory ailments, and the health effects of scarcity novel, because the scale and duration would test our medical systems in unprecedented ways. Respiratory health would become a primary concern in an ash-filled world. Volcanic ash is not like ordinary dust. It consists of tiny particles of volcanic glass that can damage lung tissue if inhaled in large quantities. The immediate response would involve the widespread distribution of dust masks and air filters, technologies that already exist and could be manufactured quickly if needed. Indoor air filtration systems would become essential health infrastructure. The same HEPA filters that currently protect people with severe allergies could protect entire communities from ash exposure. These systems would need to be installed not just in hospitals and clinics, but in community shelters and gathering spaces. Medicine stockpiles and distribution networks would face their greatest test during an extended climate crisis. Prescription medications for chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and mental health disorders would need to be stored and distributed efficiently. The just-in-time supply chains that keep modern pharmacies stocked would need to be replaced with strategic reserves and local production capabilities. But perhaps the most crucial medical consideration would be mental health, caring for the invisible wounds that come with extended stress, uncertainty, and social disruption. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress would likely affect large portions of the population during a multi-year climate crisis. This is where community support systems become as important as any medical technology. Healing happens together, not just in isolation. The communities that would maintain their psychological resilience would be those that create spaces for mutual support, that maintain cultural and spiritual practices that provide meaning during difficult times, that remember that caring for each other's emotional well-being is not a luxury but a necessity for collective survival. We've explored the physical tools and systems that might help us weather a supervolcanic winter, the greenhouses and grain reserves, the heating systems and communication networks, the medical supplies and emergency protocols. These are important preparations, the kind of tangible assets that emergency planners love to count and catalogue. But if we stop there, we're missing perhaps the most crucial element of human survival. Survival isn't just about calories and shelter, though those things certainly matter. It isn't just about having the right equipment or living in the right place when disaster strikes. At its deepest level, survival is about the human spirit, under pressure, about our capacity to maintain hope when the future seems uncertain, to find meaning in hardship, to support each other when individual strength isn't enough. This is the inner landscape of crisis, and it's terrain that humans have been navigating for as long as we've existed as a species. Consider the siege of Leningrad during World War II, when nearly 1 million civilians endured almost 900 days of blockade, starvation, and bombardment. The physical challenges were enormous. People ate wallpaper paste and leather belts, burned furniture for warmth, walked miles through snow for tiny rations of bread. But what kept the city alive wasn't just the thin supply lines that occasionally broke through enemy lines. It was the preservation of human culture under impossible conditions. The Leningrad Symphony Orchestra continued to perform even as musicians died of starvation. Teachers kept schools open in basement shelters. People continued to fall in love, to write poetry, to care for elderly neighbors who had no family left alive. They maintained their humanity not despite the crisis, but as a way of surviving it. Or think about the Dust Bowl years in the American Great Plains, when drought and dust storms turned farmland into desert and forced millions to abandon their homes. Families lost everything: their land, their livelihood, their sense of place in the world. But they also discovered capacities they didn't know they had. They learned to share resources across traditional boundaries of race and class. They developed new forms of community organization. They created art and music that captured not just their suffering, but their resilience. The lesson that emerges from these historical examples is both simple and profound. Morale matters as much as material. A community with strong social bonds and shared purpose can survive conditions that would destroy a better equipped but less cohesive group. Conversely, a community with abundant resources but poor social cohesion may fragment under pressures that a more united group could withstand. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical psychology. Hope and despair are not just feelings. They're strategies that shape behavior in measurable ways. People who believe that their actions matter, that their community supports them, and that the future holds possibilities for improvement, make different choices than people who feel isolated, helpless, and hopeless. They take better care of themselves and others. They're more likely to share resources rather than hoard them. They're more creative in solving problems and more willing to invest effort in long-term solutions. The psychology of survival, in other words, isn't separate from the practical challenges of survival. It's integral to meeting those challenges successfully. There's an ancient art that humans practice instinctively during times of crisis, though we rarely have a name for it in our everyday lives. Anthropologists call it mutual aid, but that clinical term doesn't capture the beautiful, almost choreographed way that communities can reorganize themselves when individual survival becomes impossible and collective survival becomes the only option. Watch what happens in the immediate aftermath of natural disasters. Before official relief organizations arrive, before media attention focuses on the crisis, neighbors who barely knew each other's names suddenly become extended family. People share generators, food, tools, and shelter without keeping careful account of who owes what to whom. Strangers organize impromptu kitchens to feed rescue workers. Teenagers become runners carrying messages between isolated neighborhoods. Elderly people become the keepers of important local knowledge about where to find clean water or safe shelter. This transformation isn't unique to modern disasters. The same patterns appear throughout human history whenever communities face existential challenges. During the London Blitz, when German bombs fell on the city night after night for months, Londoners didn't just endure, they adapted in ways that surprised even themselves. The underground stations became vast communal bedrooms, where people of all social classes slept side by side. Neighbors organized entertainment committees to keep spirits up during the long nights below ground. Children played games among the sleeping bodies, while adults discussed everything from politics to philosophy to recipes for making bread with whatever ingredients they could find. Medieval communities facing famine developed elaborate systems for sharing scarce resources that went far beyond simple charity. They created communal ovens that could bake bread more efficiently than individual household fires. They organized work gangs that rotated between farms so that everyone's harvest could be brought in before it spoiled. They established protocols for caring for orphaned children and elderly people who couldn't care for themselves. These weren't formal government programs. They were spontaneous innovations created by people who understood that everyone's survival depended on everyone else's survival. Pioneer communities in harsh environments developed similar systems out of necessity. Barn raisings, where an entire community would gather to build a family's shelter in a single day. Quilting bees, where women would create warm bedding while sharing news, advice, and emotional support. Harvest festivals that were simultaneously celebrations and practical gatherings for processing and preserving food for the winter months. In all of these examples, leadership emerges naturally from the community itself. Not the formal leadership of elected officials or appointed managers, but the informal leadership of people who become shepherds in the storm, individuals who somehow know how to help others find their way through chaos and uncertainty. These leaders aren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest or the most charismatic people in normal times. They're often the ones who understand that leadership in crisis means service, that authority comes from helping others rather than commanding them. They're the people who remember to check on the widow living alone, who know how to organize a work crew, who can make decisions quickly without needing to be perfect, who understand that their job is to help the community take care of itself. Sharing resources becomes a kind of currency in these situations, but it's a currency based on cooperation rather than competition. Skills matter as much as supplies. The person who knows how to preserve food, how to repair equipment, how to treat injuries, how to keep children calm during frightening times. These people become invaluable to community survival in ways that have nothing to do with how much money they had before the crisis began. Perhaps most remarkably, communities under pressure often discover that celebrations become more important, not less. Festivals and rituals that might seem frivolous during good times become essential for keeping the light alive in our hearts during dark periods. Birthdays are celebrated more enthusiastically, religious holidays are observed more carefully. Anniversary dates are marked with special attention. These aren't distractions from the serious business of survival, they're essential parts of survival itself. They remind people that they're not just trying to stay alive, but trying to stay human. They create moments of joy and connection that make the hard work of survival feel worthwhile. Storytelling serves a similar function. During long evenings, when there's little else to do, people naturally begin sharing stories, memories of better times, tales passed down from previous generations, hopes and dreams for the future. These stories feed the soul when the body hungers, creating a kind of sustenance that can't be measured in calories but is just as necessary for human survival. The psychology of surviving extended hardship requires a different kind of mental adaptation than surviving acute crises. A hurricane lasts for hours, an earthquake for minutes, even a war eventually ends. But a volcanic winter unfolds over years, requiring communities to develop what we might call generational thinking, the ability to make decisions and investments that may not pay off until long after the crisis has passed. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of human psychology to sustain during extended difficulty. Our brains are wired for immediate threats and immediate rewards. We're good at mustering extraordinary effort for short periods, at making significant sacrifices when we can see the end in sight. But maintaining hope and cooperation across multiple years of hardship requires a different kind of psychological resilience. The communities that would thrive during a volcanic winter would be those that learn to think like gardeners planting trees they'll never sit under. They would invest in education, even when survival seems to require all available resources. They would maintain cultural institutions, even when they seem like luxuries. They would continue to plan for a future beyond the crisis, even when that future seems impossibly distant. Children represent both the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity in this kind of long-term thinking. On one hand, children require resources and attention that might seem difficult to spare during a survival crisis. On the other hand, children embody the future that makes all the sacrifice and hardship meaningful. The challenge lies in protecting innocence while teaching resilience, helping children understand the reality of their situation without burdening them with adult fears and responsibilities. Children who grow up during extended crises often develop remarkable capabilities, but they also need to be children, to play and learn and dream in ways that prepare them for a world beyond the crisis. Hope, in this context, becomes more than just an emotion. It becomes a survival strategy, as essential as food storage or heating fuel. Hope is the compass that points toward tomorrow, the mental map that helps people navigate through uncertainty toward a future they can't yet see clearly. This isn't naive optimism that ignores real challenges or pretends that everything will work out automatically. It's informed hope based on understanding human capacity for adaptation and growth. It's hope grounded in community connections and practical preparations. It's hope that acknowledges that the future will be different from the past, but believes that different doesn't necessarily mean worse. The psychological adaptation required for extended hardship involves learning to find meaning and satisfaction in small daily accomplishments rather than dramatic achievements. It means celebrating the preservation of seed varieties as enthusiastically as we might once have celebrated promotions or vacations. It means finding beauty in simpler pleasures and deeper relationships. Most importantly, it means understanding that survival isn't just about making it through to the other side unchanged. The communities that would emerge from a volcanic winter would be different from the ones that entered it, probably more cooperative, more resourceful, more aware of their interdependence with each other and with the natural world. The goal wouldn't be to return to exactly the way things were before, but to carry forward the best of what was, while building something better adapted to an uncertain world. There's a curious paradox in human psychology that reveals itself most clearly during times of crisis. The worse things get, the more creative we become. Necessity, as the old saying goes, is the mother of invention, but that phrase doesn't capture the full wonder of what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary challenges and discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. Crisis strips away the comfortable routines and conventional thinking that can sometimes limit innovation during normal times. When the usual solutions aren't available, when the standard supply chains have been disrupted, when the normal experts aren't accessible, people begin experimenting with new approaches simply because they have to. During World War II, rationing and material shortages led to innovations that continued to benefit society long after the war ended. Victory gardens produced not just vegetables, but new techniques for intensive small-space agriculture. Rationing recipes led to discoveries about nutrition and food preservation. The necessity of repairing and reusing everything led to advances in materials science and recycling techniques. The same pattern appears in more recent disasters. After Hurricane Katrina, residents of New Orleans who couldn't wait for official help began developing community-based solutions for everything from water purification to emergency communication. Many of these innovations were later adopted by official emergency management agencies because they worked better than the top-down approaches that had been standard. In our modern world, this kind of grassroots innovation has become organized into what people call the maker movement networks of garage inventors, community workshops, and online collaborators who share knowledge and tools for solving practical problems. These communities have already begun thinking about resilience and sustainability challenges, developing open-source designs for everything from solar ovens to water filters to emergency shelters. The beauty of open-source solutions is that they can be shared like seeds, spreading from community to community and being adapted to local conditions and needs. A design for a simple greenhouse developed in one climate can be modified for different weather patterns and available materials. A technique for preserving food discovered in one region can be taught and adapted in others. The internet, for all its vulnerabilities during a crisis, could serve as an incredible accelerator for this kind of innovation sharing. Communities facing similar challenges could learn from each other in real time. Successful adaptations could be documented and spread globally. The collective intelligence of millions of people working on similar problems could be coordinated in ways that were never possible before in human history. This capacity for innovation under pressure represents one of humanity's greatest strengths for surviving long-term challenges like volcanic winters. We're not just the species that makes tools, we're the species that makes new tools when old tools stop working. We're not just the species that solves problems, we're the species that learns from problems and emerges with expanded capabilities. The innovations developed during a volcanic winter wouldn't disappear when the crisis ended. They would become part of humanity's permanent toolkit, making us more resilient and adaptable for whatever challenges might come next. Crisis, paradoxically, often leaves us stronger than we were before it began. Let's talk about numbers for a moment, not the kind that make your eyes glaze over during statistics classes, but the kind that put our gentle exploration into perspective and perhaps offer some unexpected comfort. The probability of a supervolcanic eruption happening in any given year is vanishingly small, but not zero, a phrase that captures the peculiar mathematics of geological risk. Scientists estimate that the chances of a VEI-8 eruption occurring in any particular year are somewhere between 1 in 700 and 1 in several million. To put that in perspective, you're more likely to be struck by lightning multiple times, to win a major lottery, or to be hit by a meteorite than to witness a supervolcanic eruption in your lifetime. But here's where the mathematics of geological time become both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Those odds apply to individual years, not to the longer spans of time that matter for geological processes. Over centuries or millennia, the cumulative probability increases substantially. It's like flipping coins. Any individual flip has a 50-50 chance of coming up heads, but if you flip enough coins, you're virtually guaranteed to see both heads and tails. The challenge for both scientists and the general public is that geological timescales operate on rhythms completely different from human timescales. We think in terms of seasons, years, maybe decades if we're planning for retirement or our children's futures. The Earth thinks in terms of hundreds of thousands of years, spans of time so vast that the entire history of human civilization represents just the most recent few seconds in the planet's day. Yellowstone's last supervolcanic eruption occurred about 640 years ago. Before that, eruptions happened roughly 800, 0, and 2.1 million years ago. These numbers might suggest a pattern: eruptions every 600, 0 to 800, 0 years, but geology doesn't follow human schedules. The intervals between eruptions vary considerably, and there's no cosmic alarm clock counting down to the next event. This is precisely why scientists monitor Yellowstone and other volcanic systems without panicking about them. They understand that overdue is a human concept that doesn't apply to geological processes. Volcanoes erupt when conditions are right, not when calendars suggest they should. The monitoring systems in place around Yellowstone represent some of the most sophisticated geological surveillance technology ever developed. Scientists have created what amounts to a comprehensive health monitoring system for the entire volcanic region, listening to the Earth's heartbeat through networks of seismometers that can detect earthquakes smaller than those perceptible to human senses. Ground deformation is measured with GPS instruments so precise they can detect changes smaller than the thickness of a sheet of paper. Gas emissions from hot springs and fumaroles are analyzed continuously for chemical changes that might indicate shifting conditions in the magma chamber below. Satellite imagery tracks subtle changes in surface temperature across the entire region. All of these instruments tell the same reassuring story. Yellowstone is behaving exactly as a large volcanic system should behave during a quiet period. The earthquakes that do occur are small and routine, the kind you'd expect from any geologically active region. Ground deformation is minimal and within normal ranges. Gas emissions show no signs of the dramatic changes that would indicate rising magma or increasing pressure. Current scientific consensus suggests that if Yellowstone were moving toward an eruption, we would know decades in advance. The precursor signals would be unmistakable: significant ground swelling, increased earthquake activity, changes in the thermal features that make Yellowstone famous. These changes would unfold over years or decades, not days or weeks. The same monitoring systems that watch Yellowstone also keep tabs on the other major volcanic systems around the world. Toba in Indonesia, Taupo in New Zealand, the Campi Flegrei caldera in Italy. All are monitored by international networks of scientists who share data and coordinate their observations. This global surveillance network represents something unprecedented in human history. Our ability to see geological changes coming from far enough away that we could adapt and prepare rather than simply react. There's a delicate balance to strike when thinking about preparing for unlikely but potentially serious events. On one side lies paranoia, the kind of anxious preoccupation that turns every news report into cause for alarm, and every day into an exhausting exercise in worst-case scenario planning. On the other side lies complacency, the assumption that unlikely events won't happen to us, that someone else will handle whatever problems arise, that preparation is unnecessary worry about things beyond our control. The sweet spot between these extremes might be called practical preparedness, the art of being ready for the unlikely while living fully for the likely. Emergency preparedness, when approached thoughtfully, isn't about fear or paranoia. It's about developing life skills that make us more resilient and self-reliant, regardless of what challenges we might face. The same supplies and skills that could help during a volcanic winter would also be valuable during power outages, severe storms, economic disruptions, or any of the more common emergencies that most people face at some point in their lives. Think of it as expanding your personal toolkit rather than building a bunker. Learning to preserve food, for instance, is useful whether you're preparing for a global crisis or simply trying to reduce food waste and save money. Developing backup heating systems makes sense for anyone who lives in a climate where winter power outages are possible. Building strong relationships with neighbors creates social resilience that benefits daily life as much as emergency situations. The psychology of reasonable preparation involves shifting from anxiety-based thinking to capability-based thinking. Instead of asking, "What terrible things might happen to me?" the question becomes, "What skills and resources would help me handle uncertainty gracefully?" This shift in perspective makes preparation feel empowering rather than frightening. It's the difference between feeling like a potential victim waiting for disaster to strike and feeling like a capable person who has thought ahead about how to take care of themselves and their community. Community resilience often matters more than individual preparedness, especially for challenges on the scale of a volcanic winter. A well-prepared individual in an unprepared community is still vulnerable. A moderately prepared individual in a well-prepared community has much better prospects for weathering extended difficulties. This suggests that some of the most valuable preparation involves social rather than material investments. Getting to know your neighbors, understanding what skills and resources exist in your community, participating in local organizations that could provide mutual support during difficult times, developing relationships with people who have different capabilities and knowledge than your own. Local food systems represent one area where community-level preparation can make a significant difference. Communities with strong farmers' markets, community gardens, and local food processing capabilities would be much more resilient during supply chain disruptions than communities entirely dependent on global food distribution systems. Similarly, communities with diverse local economies, strong social institutions, and traditions of mutual support would be better positioned to adapt to the challenges of extended crisis than communities lacking these resources. The most practical preparation philosophy might be summarized as skills over stuff. While having some emergency supplies is certainly worthwhile, the most valuable assets you can develop are knowledge and relationships that don't require storage space or maintenance. Learning to grow food, even in small spaces or challenging conditions. Understanding basic medical care and first aid. Developing mechanical skills that allow you to repair and maintain equipment. Knowing how to preserve food, purify water, generate heat, and create shelter using whatever materials are available. These skills are valuable in normal times and invaluable during emergencies. Knowledge weighs nothing in your backpack, takes up no storage space in your home, and can't be destroyed by disasters that might damage physical supplies. Perhaps most importantly, practical preparedness involves developing the psychological resilience to handle uncertainty and change gracefully. This means cultivating emotional stability, stress management techniques, and the social skills needed to work cooperatively with others during difficult times. The goal isn't to become someone who lives in constant anticipation of disaster, but rather to become someone who faces uncertainty with confidence, who can adapt to changing circumstances without panic, and who can contribute to community resilience, rather than simply hoping to benefit from it. This kind of preparation makes life better, even if no major disasters ever occur. It creates self-reliance without isolation, capability without anxiety, and readiness without fear. While individuals and communities develop their own resilience strategies, governments around the world have been quietly building systems designed to handle large-scale emergencies, including scenarios that might resemble a volcanic winter. These efforts represent some of the most sophisticated disaster planning in human history, though they often operate behind the scenes where most people never see them. Emergency management systems at local, national, and international levels have evolved significantly since the major disasters of the past century. Modern emergency management isn't just about responding to crises after they occur. It's about building systemic resilience that can prevent manageable problems from becoming catastrophic ones. Strategic food reserves represent one of the most important and least visible aspects of this preparation. Many nations maintain substantial stockpiles of basic grains and other essential foods, stored in facilities designed to preserve them for years. The United States maintains a strategic grain reserve. China stockpiles rice and wheat on a massive scale. The European Union coordinates food security policies across member nations. These reserves are typically managed quietly, rotated regularly to maintain freshness, and sized to handle normal supply disruptions rather than global catastrophes. But the infrastructure exists, and it could potentially be expanded relatively quickly if early warning systems indicated a need for longer-term food security planning. Volcanic monitoring networks represent another crucial form of governmental preparation. Organizations like the United States Geological Survey, the Global Volcanism Program, and various international research consortiums maintain sophisticated monitoring systems around potentially dangerous volcanic areas worldwide. This network functions as a global early warning system, with data sharing agreements that ensure no nation faces volcanic threats in isolation. When Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines in 1991, international cooperation in monitoring and prediction saved thousands of lives by enabling evacuations before the major eruptions occurred. The same cooperative frameworks could provide years or decades of advance warning if a supervolcanic system showed signs of moving toward eruption, allowing for unprecedented preparation and coordination of response efforts. International cooperation agreements extend beyond volcano monitoring to encompass broader disaster response and resource sharing. NATO has mutual aid provisions for natural disasters. The European Union has developed extensive frameworks for sharing emergency resources across national borders. The United Nations coordinates global disaster response through agencies like the World Food Programme and the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. These systems are tested regularly through smaller disasters and refined based on lessons learned from real-world events. Hurricane Katrina led to significant improvements in U.S. emergency management systems, The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami spurred the development of better international tsunami warning networks. Each major disaster becomes a learning opportunity that strengthens global disaster response capabilities. Research into mitigation strategies represents another area of governmental investment that most people never hear about. Scientists, funded by government agencies, study everything from emergency agriculture techniques to alternative energy systems to social psychology of disaster response. Some of this research focuses specifically on volcanic scenarios, studies of how to maintain food production under reduced sunlight conditions, research into emergency shelter systems that could house large numbers of people efficiently, development of communication systems that could function even when normal infrastructure is disrupted. Military organizations, while not primarily disaster response agencies, maintain capabilities that could be crucial during extended global emergencies. Logistics systems, designed to supply troops in remote locations, could be adapted to supply civilian populations during crisis periods. Military engineering capabilities could be essential for maintaining infrastructure under difficult conditions. Perhaps most importantly, governmental preparation increasingly recognizes that effective disaster response requires coordination between official agencies and community-level organizations. The most successful disaster responses combine top-down coordination with bottom-up initiative, official resources with community knowledge, and formal systems with informal networks. This hybrid approach acknowledges that governments can provide crucial resources and coordination during major crises, but that community-level resilience and individual preparedness remain essential components of overall disaster resilience. When we step back and consider all the factors we've explored, our technological capabilities, our global communication systems, our understanding of volcanic processes, our capacity for cooperation and innovation, a remarkably optimistic picture emerges for humanity's prospects of surviving and thriving through a supervolcanic eruption. We are uniquely prepared for this kind of challenge in ways that no previous generation of humans has ever been. Our ancestors who survived the Toba eruption 74 years ago were remarkable in their resilience and adaptability, but they faced that crisis with stone tools, local knowledge, and small tribal groups. We would face a similar challenge with global communication networks, advanced agricultural technology, international cooperation frameworks, and the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of human innovation. Our adaptability advantage extends far beyond technology. We've developed social institutions designed specifically to coordinate large-scale responses to complex challenges. We have economic systems that can redirect resources quickly when priorities change. We have educational systems that can disseminate new knowledge rapidly across entire populations. Perhaps most importantly, we've learned to think globally while acting locally. A volcanic winter would be a global challenge, requiring local adaptations, and we've developed both the global coordination mechanisms and the local problem-solving capabilities needed for this kind of distributed response. Global cooperation potential has never been higher in human history. Despite political tensions and economic competition, nations routinely cooperate on scientific research, disaster response, and environmental challenges. The frameworks for international cooperation already exist and are tested regularly through smaller crises. Technology serves as an equalizer in ways that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. A small community with internet access has potential access to the same information and innovations available to major cities. Open-source designs can be shared instantly across continents. Local manufacturing capabilities using 3D printing and other technologies can adapt global solutions to local conditions. We are not the same species that barely survived Toba. We're not even the same species that struggled through the famines and plagues of medieval times, or the economic disruptions of the early industrial era. We've evolved culturally and technologically into something unprecedented in Earth's history, a species capable of global cooperation, long-term planning, and rapid adaptation to changing conditions. A supervolcanic eruption would certainly be challenging, but it would be a challenge faced by a species with capabilities that our ancestors could never have imagined. We have every reason to believe that we would not merely survive such an event, but that we would adapt, innovate, and emerge stronger than before. Before we continue deeper into our exploration, let's pause here for a moment of quiet reflection. Take a breath slow and deep, and consider where we've traveled together in this gentle investigation. We've walked through the hidden architecture of the Earth, witnessed the patient building of pressures that could reshape continents, and followed our ancestors through their darkest winter into the light of recovery. We've inventoried the remarkable tools and capabilities that our modern world has developed, explored the psychology of survival and community resilience, and examined the careful balance between preparation and peace of mind. Perhaps most importantly, we've begun to understand our place in the vast sweep of geological time, not as helpless victims of forces beyond our control, but as a species uniquely adapted to face uncertainty with intelligence, cooperation, and hope. The picture that emerges from this exploration is neither one of guaranteed safety nor of inevitable catastrophe, but something more nuanced and ultimately more comforting, a recognition that we are capable, adaptable, and connected in ways that give us every reason for quiet confidence about our ability to weather whatever storms the Earth might have in store. As we prepare to explore the deeper lessons that emerge from this investigation, carry with you this sense of our collective capability and resilience. Volcanoes are extraordinary teachers, though they conduct their lessons on timescales that stretch human comprehension to its limits. Their curriculum includes subjects we rarely encounter in formal education: patience measured in millennia, the delicate interconnectedness of global systems, and the profound relationship between destruction and renewal that governs so much of the natural world. The first lesson is perhaps the most challenging for our hurried, instant gratification world: learning to think in geological years. Volcanoes operate according to rhythms that dwarf human experience. They build pressure slowly, sometimes over hundreds of thousands of years, teaching us that the most powerful forces often work with extraordinary patience. A volcanic system might spend 10 times longer preparing for an eruption than human civilization has existed. This geological perspective offers an unexpected form of comfort. In our daily lives, we often feel pressured to solve problems immediately, to see results quickly, to achieve instant success. But volcanoes remind us that the most significant changes often unfold slowly, that patience can be a form of power, and that some of the most important work happens invisibly, deep beneath the surface, long before any visible results appear. When we apply this volcanic patience to human challenges, it changes how we think about problems that seem urgent and overwhelming. Climate change, social inequality, educational reform. These challenges operate on timescales that are rapid by geological standards but slow by human expectations. Volcanoes teach us that working steadily toward long-term goals, even when progress seems invisible, is actually how the most fundamental changes occur. The second lesson involves the interconnectedness of systems, how everything touches everything else in ways that become visible only when the connections are disrupted. A volcanic eruption in Indonesia affects sunsets in Europe, growing seasons in North America, and monsoon patterns in Asia. Ash particles launched into the stratosphere create a web of connections that spans the entire planet. This interconnectedness extends far beyond physical systems. The Toba eruption 74 years ago didn't just change the climate, it influenced human evolution, animal migration patterns, plant distributions, and ultimately the development of human culture and technology. A single geological event rippled through biological and social systems in ways that are still shaping our world today. Understanding this interconnectedness helps us recognize that our modern global civilization, for all its complexity, is built on the same principles. Economic systems connect farmers in Kansas to consumers in Tokyo. Communication networks allow ideas developed in one laboratory to benefit research happening on the other side of the world. Environmental changes in one region affect weather patterns, migration flows, and resource availability thousands of miles away. Volcanoes teach us to think systemically, to recognize that changes in one part of a system will inevitably affect other parts, often in ways that aren't immediately obvious. This systems thinking becomes crucial for understanding how to build resilience into human communities and institutions. The third lesson involves resilience through diversity, the recognition that strength comes through variety rather than uniformity. Ecosystems that survive major volcanic disruptions are rarely the most specialized or the most perfectly adapted to specific conditions. They're the most diverse, with multiple species filling similar ecological roles and multiple strategies for obtaining food, shelter, and reproductive success. Monocultures, whether biological or social, are efficient under stable conditions, but vulnerable when those conditions change. A forest, dominated by a single tree species, may grow quickly in ideal conditions, but can be wiped out by a single disease or climate shift. A diverse forest with many different species may grow more slowly, but has a much better chance of surviving disruption because different species will respond differently to changing conditions. This principle applies directly to human communities. Economies based on a single industry are efficient but vulnerable. Communities with diverse economic activities, varied food sources, multiple energy systems, and people with different skills and knowledge are much more likely to weather disruption successfully. But diversity alone isn't enough. It must be coupled with the fourth lesson volcanoes teach, the fundamental value of community. Individual organisms rarely survive major environmental disruptions alone. Survival happens through cooperation, mutual support, and the sharing of resources and information across individuals and even across species. During the Toba winter, our human ancestors survived not as isolated individuals but as cooperative groups that shared food, tools, knowledge, and protection. The groups that maintained social cohesion and mutual support were the ones that made it through to contribute their genes and cultural knowledge to future generations. This community principle has become even more important as human societies have become more complex. Modern life creates the illusion of individual self-sufficiency. We flip switches and lights come on. We turn faucets and clean water flows. We visit stores and find shelves stocked with food from around the world. But all of these conveniences depend on vast networks of cooperation, involving millions of people we'll never meet. Volcanoes remind us that this cooperation isn't just a nice ideal, it's a practical necessity for long-term survival. The communities that would thrive during a volcanic winter would be those that understand this lesson most deeply, that have practiced cooperation and mutual support, and that have built social institutions capable of coordinating collective responses to shared challenges. These four lessons, patience, interconnectedness, diversity, and community, form a kind of curriculum for resilient living that applies far beyond volcanic scenarios. They're principles that can guide us in building more sustainable economies, more robust social institutions, and more adaptive communities, regardless of what challenges we might face. Perhaps most importantly, they remind us that humans are not separate from natural systems, but part of them. We're subject to the same principles that govern how ecosystems respond to disruption, but we're also capable of applying those principles consciously and deliberately. We can choose to build diversity into our communities, to strengthen our cooperative institutions, to think in longer timescales, and to recognize our interconnectedness with each other and with the natural world. Volcanoes, in their patient and sometimes terrifying way, are teaching us how to become more resilient, more cooperative, and more capable of thriving in an uncertain world. Their lessons are written in ash layers and geological time, but they're lessons that we can read, understand, and apply to the very human work of building communities and institutions worthy of our remarkable species. The lessons that volcanoes teach about resilience, cooperation, and long-term thinking aren't just abstract principles. They have immediate practical applications for the challenges our modern world faces today. In many ways, preparing for a volcanic winter is excellent practice for addressing other slow-motion disasters that unfold over years or decades rather than hours or days. Climate change represents perhaps the closest parallel to a volcanic winter scenario. Both involve gradual changes in global atmospheric conditions that affect growing seasons, weather patterns, and ecosystem stability. Both require adaptations that span multiple years and affect entire civilizations. Both challenge us to coordinate responses across national boundaries and diverse communities. The skills needed to adapt to a volcanic winter, developing resilient food systems, building community cooperation, creating backup energy sources, maintaining social cohesion during difficult periods, are precisely the skills we need for climate adaptation. Communities that practice these capabilities in preparation for unlikely volcanic scenarios are also building the resilience they'll need for more probable climate challenges. Emergency agriculture techniques developed for volcanic winters could be applied during droughts, floods, or other climate-related disruptions to normal farming. Indoor growing systems designed to function without natural sunlight could provide food security during any period when outdoor agriculture becomes unreliable. Food preservation and distribution systems, capable of functioning during global supply chain disruptions, would be valuable for many different types of crises. The experience of the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated how skills transfer from crisis to crisis in surprisingly direct ways. Communities that had practiced emergency preparedness for natural disasters were often better equipped to handle pandemic-related supply chain disruptions. People who had developed social networks for mutual aid during hurricanes or wildfires were able to adapt those same networks to help neighbors during lockdowns and economic hardship. Pandemic preparedness and volcanic winter preparedness share many common elements. The need for stockpiled supplies, backup systems for essential services, communication networks that can function when normal systems are disrupted, and social institutions capable of coordinating collective responses to shared threats. The psychological challenges are also similar. Both pandemics and volcanic winters require people to maintain cooperation and hope during extended periods of uncertainty and hardship. Both challenge communities to balance individual needs with collective welfare. Both require leaders who can help people adapt to rapidly changing conditions while maintaining social cohesion. Economic resilience represents another area where volcanic winter preparation translates directly to more common challenges. Building systems that bend but don't break requires diversification, redundancy, and the ability to adapt quickly when conditions change. Principles that apply whether the disruption comes from volcanic ash, pandemic lockdowns, supply chain problems, or financial crises. Local economic networks become crucial during any kind of extended disruption. Communities with strong local food systems, local manufacturing capabilities, and local service networks are more resilient than communities entirely dependent on global supply chains. This doesn't mean abandoning global connections. It means building local capacity as a foundation for participating in larger networks. The maker movement, community workshops, and local food systems that would be valuable during a volcanic winter are also valuable for economic resilience in normal times. They create jobs, build skills, strengthen social connections, and reduce dependence on distant systems that may be vulnerable to disruption. Social cohesion serves as the glue that holds communities together during any kind of stress, whether it comes from natural disasters, economic hardship, or social conflict. The community building practices that would be essential during a volcanic winter, mutual aid networks, shared decision-making processes, conflict resolution skills, and celebration of common values strengthen communities regardless of what challenges they face. Neighborhoods with strong social connections weather storms better, recover from disasters more quickly, and provide better quality of life for their residents during normal times. The time to build these connections is before they're needed, not after a crisis has already begun. Educational systems that prepare people for uncertainty and change become valuable for any kind of future challenge. Teaching practical skills like food preservation, basic medical care, repair and maintenance, and conflict resolution creates more resilient communities. Teaching systems, thinking, long-term planning, and cooperation skills prepares people to contribute to collective problem-solving regardless of what problems arise. Perhaps most importantly, volcanic winter preparation helps us develop what might be called crisis confidence, the psychological resilience that comes from knowing we have capabilities, resources, and social connections that would help us handle difficult situations. This confidence reduces anxiety about uncertain futures and increases willingness to take on challenges and work for positive change. People who feel capable of handling disruption are more likely to support necessary changes to address long-term problems. They're less likely to be paralyzed by fear about uncertain futures and more likely to work constructively toward solutions. Crisis confidence, paradoxically, makes people more effective at preventing crises from developing in the first place. The modern applications of volcanic wisdom extend into urban planning, where cities are beginning to design infrastructure for resilience rather than just efficiency. Water systems with multiple sources and treatment methods, energy grids that can function even when some components fail, food distribution systems that include local production as well as global supply chains. Transportation networks designed with redundancy in mind can continue functioning even when some routes are blocked. Communication systems that include both high-tech and low-tech options ensure that information can flow even when sophisticated systems fail. All of these applications share a common theme: building systems that can adapt to unexpected challenges rather than just optimizing for predictable conditions. This represents a fundamental shift in thinking, from efficiency-focused design to resilience-focused design, a change that would benefit our communities, regardless of whether volcanic winters, climate change, pandemics, or other challenges become the defining crises of our era. The beautiful aspect of this approach is that building resilience for unlikely but serious challenges like volcanic winters simultaneously builds resilience for much more likely challenges like economic disruption, extreme weather, or social conflict. Every step we take toward being prepared for the extraordinary makes us more capable of handling the ordinary difficulties that every community faces. When we zoom out to examine the full sweep of human history, a remarkable pattern emerges. We are a species that has been shaped, challenged, and ultimately strengthened by catastrophe. Every major advance in human capability, from the development of language to the invention of agriculture to the creation of global communication networks, can be traced back to our ancestors' responses to existential challenges. Ice ages forced our early ancestors to develop better tools, more sophisticated clothing, and more complex forms of social cooperation. Droughts drove the development of irrigation systems and food storage techniques. Diseases spurred advances in medicine and public health. Wars, despite their terrible costs, accelerated innovations in transportation, communication, and manufacturing. This doesn't mean that catastrophes are good, or that we should seek them out. But it does suggest that humans have an extraordinary capacity to transform challenges into opportunities, to learn from disasters, and to emerge from crises with expanded capabilities. The Toba supervolcanic eruption 74 years ago provides perhaps the most dramatic example of this pattern. The near-extinction bottleneck that our species experienced during that volcanic winter appears to have accelerated human development rather than simply setting us back. The survivors who emerged from that crisis carried genetic, cultural, and technological innovations that enabled the rapid expansion and diversification of human populations that followed. Archaeological evidence suggests that the period after Toba saw significant advances in tool technology, the development of more sophisticated hunting strategies, the expansion of trade networks, and possibly the evolution of more complex language capabilities. It's as if our species used the crisis as a catalyst for developing the very traits that would eventually make us the dominant species on the planet. This pattern distinguishes humans from other species in fundamental ways. Most animals respond to environmental challenges through biological adaptation that occurs over many generations. Humans respond through cultural adaptation that can happen within a single generation or even within individual lifetimes. We are the planning animal, the species that can anticipate future challenges, develop tools and strategies in advance, and consciously reshape our environment and behavior to meet changing conditions. Where other species adapt to their environment, we adapt our environment to ourselves while simultaneously adapting ourselves to new environmental conditions. This planning capability depends on our unique combination of intelligence, communication, and social cooperation. Individual humans are not particularly impressive physical specimens. We lack the strength of bears, the speed of cheetahs, or the environmental tolerance of many other species. But our ability to share knowledge, coordinate actions across large groups, and build on the accumulated wisdom of previous generations gives us capabilities that no other species has ever possessed. Cultural evolution has become our primary survival advantage. Where biological evolution requires genetic changes that take thousands of years to spread through populations, cultural evolution can spread beneficial innovations around the world in months or even days. A discovery made in one laboratory can be applied in other laboratories within hours. A successful adaptation developed in one community can be adopted by other communities as soon as they learn about it. This cultural evolution accelerates during times of crisis. The necessity of finding solutions to immediate survival problems drives innovation, experimentation, and the sharing of knowledge across traditional boundaries. The same pressures that challenge us also push us to develop new capabilities. The role of imagination becomes crucial in this process. Unlike other species, humans can envision scenarios that haven't happened yet and prepare for them in advance. We can run mental simulations of possible futures, develop contingency plans, and build systems designed to handle challenges that may never actually occur. This capacity for imagination-based preparation is what allows us to build early warning systems for volcanic eruptions, maintain strategic food reserves for potential famines, and develop communication networks designed to function during emergencies. We're the only species that prepares for disasters that might happen rather than just responding to disasters that are already happening. Our modern global civilization represents the culmination of thousands of years of this disaster-driven innovation. The internet evolved from military communication systems designed to survive nuclear attacks. Modern medicine developed from responses to plagues and epidemics. International cooperation frameworks emerged from efforts to prevent or manage global conflicts. Even our most abstract cultural achievements, art, literature, philosophy, religion, often emerge from our efforts to find meaning and maintain hope during difficult periods. Some of humanity's greatest creative works were produced during times of social upheaval, war, or personal hardship. This suggests that preparing for a potential volcanic winter isn't just about stockpiling supplies or developing backup systems. It's about maintaining and strengthening the cultural and institutional capabilities that define us as a species, our ability to cooperate across differences, to share knowledge and resources, to plan for uncertain futures, and to find meaning and beauty even in difficult circumstances. The bigger picture that emerges from this historical perspective is both humbling and encouraging. We are not the masters of our environment. In any absolute sense, we remain vulnerable to forces much larger than ourselves. But we are remarkably adaptable, creative, and resilient when we work together and apply our unique capabilities to shared challenges. A supervolcanic eruption would certainly test these capabilities in unprecedented ways, but it would be testing capabilities that have been developed and refined through thousands of years of human experience with catastrophe, adaptation, and recovery. We are not the same species that barely survived Toba, but we are the descendants of those survivors, carrying forward their resilience, their adaptability, and their stubborn determination to not just survive but to build something better from the ruins of whatever disasters they faced. This evolutionary perspective suggests that a future volcanic winter, while certainly challenging, would likely become another chapter in the long story of human adaptation and innovation, rather than the final chapter in human history. History is filled with communities that not only survived disasters but somehow managed to thrive in their aftermath, transforming catastrophe into catalyst for innovation and growth. These stories offer practical lessons about human adaptability and provide inspiration for thinking about how modern communities might respond to challenges like volcanic winters. The city of Lisbon, Portugal, was virtually destroyed by a massive earthquake in 1755, followed by fires and tsunamis that killed tens of thousands of people and leveled most of the city's buildings. Rather than simply rebuilding what had been lost, city planners used the disaster as an opportunity to redesign Lisbon according to Enlightenment principles of rational urban planning. The new Lisbon featured wider streets that could serve as fire breaks, buildings designed to withstand earthquakes, and improved water and sewage systems. The reconstruction process took decades, but the result was a city that was more beautiful, more functional, and more resilient than the original had ever been. Today, Lisbon's downtown area, known as the Baixa, is considered one of Europe's finest examples of 18th century urban planning. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 destroyed much of the city, leaving more than 100 people homeless and causing damage equivalent to billions of dollars in today's currency. But Chicago's response demonstrated the power of community cooperation and forward-thinking planning. Instead of seeing the fire as pure catastrophe, civic leaders viewed it as an opportunity to build a better city. The rebuilding effort established Chicago as a center of architectural innovation, featuring some of the world's first skyscrapers and introducing new building techniques that would influence urban development worldwide. The city also implemented new fire safety codes and improved water systems that made the rebuilt Chicago much safer than the original had been. Perhaps most remarkably, the disaster strengthened rather than weakened Chicago's sense of community identity. The shared experience of loss and rebuilding created social bonds that lasted for generations and helped establish Chicago as one of America's most dynamic and resilient cities. San Francisco's response to the 1906 earthquake and fire provides another example of disaster as catalyst for positive change. The earthquake and subsequent fires destroyed most of the city, but the rebuilding process created opportunities for urban improvements that might have been impossible under normal circumstances. The new San Francisco featured improved infrastructure, better building codes, and expanded parks and public spaces. The disaster also accelerated social changes that were already underway, breaking down some traditional class and ethnic barriers as people from different backgrounds worked together on rebuilding effort. These Western examples share common themes with responses to disasters in other cultural contexts. The Japanese concept of mono no aware, often translated as the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things, reflects a philosophical approach to catastrophe that emphasizes acceptance and renewal rather than resistance and grieving. This perspective doesn't minimize the reality of loss or suffering, but it recognizes that change, including painful change, is an inevitable part of existence. Communities influenced by this philosophy often demonstrate remarkable resilience during disasters, because they're culturally prepared to accept that the old ways may not work anymore, and that adaptation requires embracing new approaches. Japanese communities have repeatedly demonstrated this resilience in response to earthquakes, tsunamis, and other natural disasters. The speed and effectiveness of recovery efforts often amaze outside observers, but they reflect centuries of cultural experience with living in a geologically active region where disasters are routine rather than exceptional. Indigenous knowledge systems around the world offer additional models for community resilience that emphasize long-term thinking and sustainable relationships with natural environments. Many indigenous communities have traditions that explicitly prepare for periodic environmental disruptions, drought cycles, flood cycles, or other natural variations that occur over decades or centuries. These traditions often include sophisticated food storage and preservation techniques, mobility strategies that allow communities to relocate when necessary, and social institutions designed to maintain cultural continuity, even when physical circumstances change dramatically. The Hopi people of the American Southwest, for example, developed agricultural techniques specifically designed to function during extended drought periods. Their traditional farming methods include water conservation strategies, drought-resistant crop varieties, and community cooperation systems that ensure everyone has access to food even during the worst years. Pacific Island communities developed navigation and seafaring technologies that allowed them to maintain connections across vast ocean distances, ensuring that isolated communities could receive help during local disasters and that cultural knowledge could be preserved even if individual islands faced catastrophic events. These traditional approaches often combine practical techniques with cultural practices that maintain community morale and identity during difficult periods. Ceremonies, festivals, and storytelling traditions serve not just as entertainment, but as essential mechanisms for preserving knowledge, strengthening social bonds, and maintaining hope during challenging times. The common thread running through all these examples is the recognition that resilience is not just about individual survival, but about community adaptation. The communities that thrive after disasters are those that maintain their social connections, preserve essential knowledge and skills, and remain open to innovation and change while staying grounded in core values and relationships. There's something beautifully paradoxical about spending time studying catastrophes in the gentle, contemplative way we've been doing together. On the surface, it might seem contradictory to find comfort in exploring scenarios of global disruption, to discover peace in contemplating challenges that could test human civilization to its limits. Yet this is precisely what happens when we approach potentially frightening topics with curiosity rather than anxiety, with preparation rather than panic, and with confidence in human capability rather than helpless dread. The more we understand about challenges like volcanic winters, the more we realize how remarkably well equipped we are to handle them. Understanding our capabilities turns out to be profoundly comforting. When we explore the technological tools, social institutions, and adaptive abilities that humans have developed over millennia, we begin to see ourselves not as potential victims of uncontrollable forces, but as a species uniquely prepared to face uncertainty with intelligence and cooperation. The strange peace that comes from being prepared operates on multiple levels. Practically, knowing that we have food storage systems, communication networks, and community support structures reduces anxiety about uncertain futures. Psychologically, understanding that we've survived similar challenges before and emerged stronger creates confidence about our ability to handle whatever comes next. But perhaps most importantly, this preparation process strengthens the very capabilities that make survival more likely. Communities that have thought carefully about resilience, that have practiced cooperation and mutual aid, that have developed diverse skills and strong social connections. These communities are better prepared, not just for volcanic winters, but for all the more common challenges that life presents. The act of preparing for unlikely but serious challenges creates what emergency management professionals call positive spillover effects. The same social networks that could coordinate disaster response also improve daily quality of life. The same practical skills that could be essential during crises are also useful for sustainable living during normal times. The same psychological resilience that could help during extended hardships also makes people happier and more effective in their regular lives. This is why studying catastrophe can feel so strangely soothing. It's not that we're hoping for disasters to occur or finding excitement in others' potential suffering. Rather, we're discovering that humans have remarkable capabilities that are often hidden during comfortable times, but reveal themselves during periods of challenge. The process of exploration itself becomes a form of preparation. When we think carefully about how we might respond to various scenarios, We're strengthening the mental pathways that would be needed for actual crisis response. We're practicing the kind of creative problem-solving, long-term thinking, and community-oriented planning that would be essential during real emergencies. Even more importantly, we're cultivating what might be called educated optimism, hope based on understanding rather than wishful thinking. This is fundamentally different from naive optimism that ignores real challenges, or cynical pessimism that assumes the worst outcomes are inevitable. Educated optimism acknowledges that serious challenges exist and may occur, but recognizes that humans have extraordinary capabilities for meeting those challenges successfully. It's optimism grounded in historical evidence of human adaptability, technological innovation, and community resilience. This perspective creates a virtuous cycle. The more we understand about our capabilities, the more confident we become about our ability to handle difficulties. The more confident we become, the more likely we are to invest in preparation and community building. The more we invest in preparation and community building, the more capable we actually become. The gentle paradox resolves into a simple truth. Studying catastrophe with the right mindset doesn't create fear, it creates competence. Understanding challenges doesn't generate anxiety, it generates capability. Preparing for difficulties doesn't diminish joy in daily life. It creates the foundation for sustainable happiness that can weather whatever storms may come. Perhaps this is why bedtime stories often feature heroes facing impossible odds and finding ways to prevail. Perhaps this is why we're drawn to tales of adventure and challenge and ultimate triumph. We're not seeking anxiety or excitement, we're seeking reassurance about our own capabilities, confirmation that intelligence, courage, and cooperation can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. In our quiet exploration of volcanic winters and human survival, we've been telling ourselves a kind of bedtime story, not a fantasy tale about magical solutions, but a realistic story about remarkable capabilities, proven resilience, and the beautiful human capacity to face uncertainty with wisdom, preparation, and hope. This is the strange piece of being prepared, not the elimination of all possible challenges, but the quiet confidence that comes from understanding how capable, adaptable, and connected we really are. As our gentle exploration draws toward its close, we find ourselves slowly drifting back to the present moment, like travelers returning from a long journey through distant lands and ancient times. We've walked together through the hidden chambers beneath continents, witnessed the patient building of pressures that could reshape the world, and followed the threads of human resilience across thousands of years of challenge and adaptation. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We began in the depths of geological time, exploring the secret architecture of supervolcanoes and the slow, patient processes that shape our dynamic planet. We traveled back 74,000 years to witness our ancestors facing their greatest test, somehow finding the strength and ingenuity to carry our species through a winter that dimmed the sun itself. We inventoried the remarkable capabilities of our modern world, the technologies, institutions, and accumulated wisdom that represent thousands of years of human innovation and cooperation. Along the way, we've discovered something unexpected and deeply comforting. The more we understand about the challenges we might face, the more confident we can become about our ability to meet those challenges successfully. Knowledge, it turns out, is a powerful antidote to anxiety. Understanding is a remarkable source of peace. We began with a question written in stone, carved into the geological record by eruptions that occurred long before humans walked the Earth. Could our species survive such an event? But as we've explored this question together, we've discovered that it opens into much larger questions about human nature, community resilience, and our remarkable capacity to adapt and thrive in an uncertain world. The comfort that comes from knowledge, rather than ignorance, extends far beyond the specific scenario of supervolcanic eruptions. When we understand how systems work, whether they're geological systems, biological systems, or social systems, we're better equipped to respond thoughtfully rather than react fearfully when those systems face disruption. This principle applies to challenges both large and small. Understanding how our local food system functions makes us more resilient during supply chain disruptions. Understanding how our community networks operate makes us more effective during emergencies. Understanding how our own psychological responses work makes us more capable of maintaining hope and taking constructive action during difficult periods. The journey we've taken together represents a particular way of approaching uncertainty, not by ignoring it or being paralyzed by it, but by studying it carefully, thoughtfully, and with confidence in our collective human capabilities. This approach transforms potentially frightening topics into opportunities for learning, growth, and deeper appreciation of the remarkable species we belong to. As we prepare to answer the question that has guided our exploration, carry with you this sense of informed confidence. We're not naive optimists who believe that nothing bad will ever happen, nor are we pessimists who assume that difficulties are insurmountable. We're people who have taken the time to understand both the challenges we might face and the capabilities we bring to meeting those challenges. That understanding, more than any specific preparation or technology, represents our greatest source of resilience and hope. So here we are, at the heart of the question that has guided our gentle exploration. Could humans survive a supervolcano? After walking together through deep time and modern capability, through historical example and scientific understanding, the answer emerges not as a dramatic proclamation but as a quiet, confident affirmation. The answer is a gentle yes, not a triumphant, chest-thumping yes that dismisses the real challenges such an event would present, not a naive yes that assumes everything would work out easily without significant hardship and adaptation, but a thoughtful, informed yes based on careful consideration of human capabilities, technological resources, and the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of surviving and thriving through difficulties. This confidence rests on several foundations we've explored together. First, we have technological capabilities that would have seemed miraculous to our ancestors who survived the Toba eruption. Our ability to monitor volcanic systems and predict eruptions years in advance gives us an advantage no previous generation has possessed. Our global communication networks allow for coordination and resource sharing on scales never before possible. Our agricultural technologies, from indoor farming to food preservation, provide alternatives to traditional farming that could function even under dramatically altered climatic conditions. But technology alone wouldn't be sufficient without the social and institutional capabilities we've also developed. Our capacity for large-scale cooperation, for organizing complex logistical operations, for sharing resources across traditional boundaries, these represent perhaps our greatest advantages. We are not the scattered bands of perhaps 10,000 individuals who barely survived Toba 74, 0 years ago. We are a globally connected species of nearly 8 billion people, with institutions designed specifically for coordinating responses to large-scale challenges. The mathematics of survival work in our favor in ways they never have before. Even if a supervolcanic eruption caused significant crop failures and supply chain disruptions, the global food system currently produces enough calories to feed more people than currently exist. The challenge wouldn't be absolute scarcity, but distribution and coordination. Complex problems, certainly, but problems well within human capabilities to solve. Our diversity represents another crucial advantage. We live in different climates, grow different crops, have developed different technologies, and possess different knowledge systems. A volcanic winter that severely affected agriculture in some regions might have much less impact in others. Communities that struggled with food production might excel at manufacturing or communication or social organization. Our species' strength lies not in uniformity but in variety, in having many different approaches, skills, and resources distributed across many different communities. Most importantly, we have learned that cooperation generally produces better outcomes than competition, especially during crises. The communities that thrived after historical disasters were those that shared resources, coordinated their efforts, and supported each other through difficult periods. Our modern institutions, for all their imperfections, are built around principles of mutual aid and collective problem-solving that would be essential during any global challenge. It would be difficult, certainly. A supervolcanic eruption would disrupt normal life in ways that would require significant adaptation and probably involve real hardship for many people. Some communities would face greater challenges than others. Some individuals and families would struggle more than others. The social and economic changes required might be profound and permanent, but difficult is not the same as impossible. Humans have repeatedly demonstrated the ability to adapt to changing conditions, to develop new technologies and social arrangements, to find ways of not just surviving, but eventually thriving in circumstances their ancestors never could have imagined. The scenario would likely accelerate changes that are already underway toward more sustainable agriculture, more resilient local economies, more robust social support systems, and more sophisticated global coordination mechanisms. Crisis has historically served as a catalyst for innovation and social development, rather than simply as a destroyer of existing capabilities. Perhaps most importantly, we would face such a challenge, not as isolated individuals, or even isolated communities, but as a globally connected species with unprecedented capabilities for sharing information, coordinating responses, and supporting each other across vast distances. The same technologies that create vulnerabilities in our modern systems also create possibilities for resilience that no previous generation has possessed. The answer, then, is not just that we could survive, but that we would likely emerge from such an experience with expanded capabilities, stronger community connections, and renewed appreciation for the cooperative values that make large-scale survival possible. We are a species that has consistently transformed challenges into opportunities for growth and development. Facing potential catastrophes like supervolcanoes can be daunting, but deep time thinking offers a powerful source of perspective and comfort. Geological time teaches us that while challenges are inevitable, they unfold over long periods, giving life, including human societies, time to adapt, respond, and grow. Earth has weathered countless disruptions, and so have we. Thinking in deep time helps shift our mindset from fear to curiosity, from anxiety to commitment. It reminds us that our problems, though real, are temporary within the grand scale of planetary history. From volcanic winters to climate change, the traits that have always helped humanity survive, cooperation, adaptability, and hope, remain our greatest tools. This broader perspective doesn't dismiss our struggles but reframes them. When we see ourselves as part of a long continuum of survival and innovation, our challenges become part of a larger story. We are both beneficiaries of our ancestors' resilience and stewards of our descendants' future. Wonder plays a key role in this shift. When we engage with difficult questions about natural disasters, climate, or the future with curiosity, we reduce fear and build agency. Knowledge is calming. It equips us to act wisely rather than worry blindly. Preparing for rare catastrophes like supervolcanoes turns out to be excellent practice for everyday life. The same qualities, resilience, connection, creativity, and compassion, help us thrive in any context. Communities that value both practicality and beauty, support the vulnerable, and plan wisely for the future are the ones best prepared to face uncertainty. Ultimately, living with a deep time mindset means embracing both our smallness and our power, small in the face of cosmic time, powerful in our capacity to care, adapt, and endure. Sleep well tonight, knowing we come from survivors and we continue their legacy. Sweet dreams.